Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. One of the more perplexing capabilities of the human mind is what we call the attention span. We all understand this to mean that the mind can focus on something for a given amount of time without drifting off into other things. This seems to be an ability that is entirely under our control. Theoretically, we should be able to keep it going indefinitely. It's like turning on a switch and keeping it on. The problem, of course, is keeping that switch on. There seem to be no end of obstacles to actually doing this. We can try all we want to keep that flow of mental electricity going, but we all know that it runs out after a while. It frequently happens suddenly, and we don't even realize that we are not paying attention to the very thing that we set our minds to pay attention to. This is a rather strange and frustrating occurrence, but it happens so often that we come to expect it. It can be safely assumed that this is an ability that grows with the mind. There is little to no indication that babies have this, but nobody really knows. Little children appear to possess it, though it isn't clear that they do so consciously. Perhaps it is something that the mind does automatically that develops over time into a trainable skill. There are people who are remarkably good at this, maintaining mental focus on something for hours at a stretch. It can be nothing short of amazing to witness such a thing. It seems almost superhuman. But these people can maintain concentration as if there is nothing else in the world happening around them. Chess masters are particularly good at this. So are mathematicians and very talented musicians. An artist at work might display this talent while focusing intensely on their project. Those people who scale vertical rock faces, or those who study the mating habits of certain animals, have great need for such concentration. It is one of the great human skills, both naturally ingrained in the brain and honed and finely tuned through years of practice and experience. It is unclear if human beings have always had this ability. It would seem that people back in the caves would have had great need for sustaining the attention span. Tracking an animal or building a fire cannot be done with the mind always drifting off or spacing out. Perhaps as long as people needed to spend significant amounts of time trying to survive, they would have had to rely on this natural but uniquely human skill. Animals do this naturally, but not, as far as we can tell, consciously. Humans do it actively and deliberately, and we no longer use it exclusively for survival methods. We do it for work, for play, for exercise, for relaxation, and for just about anything else that demands the concentrated application of the mind. There has been a claim that the technical developments of recent decades are setting us on a path of rapid diminishing of the attention span. With regards to youth and their almost universal addiction to their phones and other gadgets, there is little question that this is happening as we speak. While these young people, or anybody of any age who endlessly fools around on their phone, are focusing their minds on that screen to the exclusion of all else, this can hardly be called attention span. In a sense, it is the opposite. The mind is drawn into whatever is so interesting on the phone and doesn't really have to make any effort to maintain concentration. It happens automatically to such a degree that it is difficult to pull away from it. It trains the mind so that true attention span is actually diminished, since it is not used to doing anything other than allowing some external force to control it. This will only get worse as time goes on. We all know this. As the gadgets get more and more embedded into our bodies in one way or another, we will lose the increasingly useless ability to turn the mind on consciously. This promises to be a great tragedy in human evolution. We are, in a sense, planning our own obsolescence. We are outsourcing our greatest innate faculty to machines, and we may wake up one day without the ability to sustain conscious thought. This is about as bad as it gets on the dystopian scale. The truly sad thing about this is that we won't notice it or even miss it. If you are wondering what any of this has to do with the Parsha, you are still thinking actively. This Parsha is called Tetzaveh, which means you shall command. The Parsha parallels last week's Parsha, which dealt with the tabernacle or Mishkan and all the things that were in it. Tetzaveh deals almost exclusively with the garments worn by the high priest or Kohen Gadol, who officiated in the Mishkan. These garments were quite elaborate, containing significant amounts of gold and very specifically dyed threads. The fact is, even calling these things garments is a bit of a stretch. They were really adornments that happened to cover most of the body.
Hi, this is Yitzhak Reuven from the Temple Institute. You may know me from our website, from our Facebook page, from our YouTube channel with over 70,000 subscribers, from our Instagram account, or from our Twitter account. But the Temple Institute, as you know, is much more than simply an internet presence. We have a beautiful exhibition here in the old city of Jerusalem filled with the temple vessels which we have recreated for use in the rebuilt Holy Temple, and also many, many beautiful paintings illustrating the service, the avoda that was done in the Holy Temple. In order for us to continue our work, we need your support. Please give your generous support to the Temple Institute. Click on the donate link below.
In total, there were 6 of these adornments listed. They were a breastplate, an apron, a robe, a type of shirt, a turban, and a belt. Of these, the most elaborate descriptions are given for the apron and the breastplate. The robe and the turban each have a few verses describing them, while the shirt and the belt are only mentioned in passing. There is a reason for this. The shirt and the belt were made solely of linen that was knitted. There were no other decorative elements to them. They were purely functional and could be called articles of clothing. But with the other items, there was much more going on in terms of adornment. The apron, surprisingly, is particularly complex. It is called an ephod in the Torah, and it is a bit unclear what exactly it looked like. It could have been more of a cape than an apron, or even a kind of vest. It definitely had sections that draped over the shoulders, which were elaborately decorated with gold threads and precious stones. The entire garment, including its belt, was also quite complex, made of a combination of linen, gold thread, and wool dyed in the colors of sky blue, dark red, and crimson. A certain type of quartz, typically identified as a sardonyx, was placed in gold settings on the shoulder straps. There were 2 of these stones, one on each shoulder, and upon them were engraved the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. This was a highly symbolic adornment, with the explicit intention being that the high priest should carry these names on his shoulders as a reminder when he stood before Hashem in the Mishkan. The breastplate was also quite elaborate, with even more precious stones than the apron. There were 12 such stones on the breastplate, each of a different variety. Though some of the Hebrew names are difficult to translate, they certainly included a diamond and a sapphire. These 12 stones were mounted in gold settings in 4 rows, with the Torah describing which stones were to be in which row. The breastplate was attached to the shoulder straps of the apron with chains made of gold rings. Inside the breastplate was the most mysterious item among the adornments, something called the Urim and Tumim. There is no translation for these words, since it isn't clear what they were, or even if they were distinct objects. They might have been some sort of focus of meditation of the high priest that somehow centered around the breastplate. They have remained forever as a kind of holy grail within Jewish mystical lore. The robe was made of sky blue dyed wool and had its only distinguishing feature of pomegranate-shaped things woven out of wool that hung from the bottom. In between the pomegranates were gold bells, so that a bell separated between all of them. The high priest always had to wear this robe when performing any divine service, so that the bells would be heard when he entered the sanctuary and when he left. This, the Torah states, was done so that he, quote, wouldn't die. The turban was made of linen, but it included a very impressive forehead plate made of pure gold. Engraved in this plate were the words, Holy to Hashem, written in the ancient Hebrew script, which has not been used by the Jews for well over 2,000 years. This forehead plate was granted special powers in the service, believed to achieve some sort of atonement for mistakes made in the holy offerings brought by the Israelites. That expression concerning the gold bells on the robe is certainly unexpected. Why does the Torah say that the high priest had these bells on this robe to prevent him from death? In no other garment is this ominous warning given. He had to wear all of them whenever he performed the divine service, but it is only with the robe that the apparent threat of death is mentioned. Specifically, the Torah states about the robe, quote, its sound will be heard when he enters into the sanctuary before Hashem and when he leaves. so that he not die. There are reasons that have been suggested for this strange warning. There is no question that it has something to do with the sound the bells made. The purpose of bells is to ring, so that somebody is made aware of the presence of something. In an ancient rabbinic text, it is stated that this was all there to teach the lesson that one should not enter into the presence of another person unannounced and by surprise. This is simply a matter of common courtesy. People don't like to be barged in upon, and the same courtesy is expected when one enters the presence of God. While this teaches a valuable lesson, it doesn't really explain the warning of death associated with the robe and these bells. Perhaps a more exact explanation can be found by asking who exactly was supposed to hear these bells. The high priest was frequently alone when performing these services. There was nobody else around to hear him come and go. It is not at all clear that it was God who would hear this. Perhaps the intention was for the high priest himself. He would hear these bells ringing when he entered and exited. But why would he need to hear this? He knew exactly what he was doing and needed no bells to inform him where he was going. The answer is that he needed this constant reminder to keep his mind focused on what he was doing. Even someone involved in such a task ran the ever-present risk of spacing out and losing focus. This is the way the mind works. We try to focus and we find that we're thinking about almost anything else. We need something to keep the mind zoned in on the exact task it is supposed to be engaged with. This was the purpose of these bells. Anything short of complete focus, any diminishing of the attention span, could result in a fatal error. This was not playing a game on a phone or popping something into the microwave. It was communing with God on the highest order. There was no room for error and no option for drifting off. God is not some other person receiving a text. To commune with God demands the greatest of our faculties, the focused human mind. Shabbat Shalom.